On this episode, the National Transportation Safety Board did a special investigation report on pedestrian safety. Then, we talk with the president of Bike Baton Rouge. Stay tuned.
We're at the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C., talking with member Bella Denzar. What is the NTSB?
The NTSB is the National Transportation Safety Board, and we're an independent federal agency with the sole purpose of investigating transportation disasters and making safety recommendations to make sure they don't happen again.
And how is your role different from some other organizations people might have heard of, like the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration? How does your role differ?
That's a good question. We are unique because we are completely independent. We've been independent for more than 50 years, and we have a single pretty noble purpose, and that is safety. So we don't regulate, we have no authority to regulate, but we make safety recommendations purely for the purpose of improving safety, and we're multimodal.
Speaking of multimodal, you recently came out with a special investigative report on pedestrians. What was the report? What did you talk about?
Yes, we had a pedestrian, we call it a special investigation report, and that's where we actually do a series of investigations on a certain topic in order to make ultimately a set of recommendations. And this was actually our first pedestrian investigation report of this type since our inception. We started off right off the bat about 50 years ago and did a report on pedestrians. But in recent years, we've seen, as you know, more than anyone, that pedestrian safety is a major concern, and we wanted to see what we could do to help make recommendations to stop the deaths of pedestrians. So this was a investigation of 15 pedestrian deaths. It's not meant to be nationally representative. It's symbolic in a way because it was representing, at the time, the 15 deaths per day of pedestrians in the U.S. Of course, now it's gone up and it's closer to 16. But it's meant to be a snapshot to give us a glimpse of why pedestrians were dying on the roads and what we can do to stop that.
And how does NTSB go about investigating a crash? The pedestrian just got hit. How do you collect the data? How do you analyze what went on?
Yeah, it's not so easy. As you can imagine, we're much more used to doing investigations where there is a large airplane that's crashed or a train. So we have a lot of material evidence. Of course, in a pedestrian, it's much more fleeting. So we worked very closely with our collaborators in law enforcement. So as soon as they heard about a pedestrian crash, a pedestrian death, we were notified, and we would get there as soon as possible. And we had to learn to really use new tools that kept us agile. So we were able to get there quickly with a GoPro camera, collect the evidence, talk to people on the scene, make a good assessment of the whole scene, because the evidence, the facts wouldn't last very long, unlike if there was a train that had derailed, for example.
Now you're looking at, I assume, what the pedestrian did, what the vehicle did, the surrounding environment. What sort of things are you looking at?
So our Office of Highway Safety, we have experts in all different areas. So we look at the human factor side, the infrastructure, even the emergency response, the weather. We look at any factor, any of the records that might have gone. We look at the vehicle that struck the pedestrian to see if there's any type of event data recorder information, any cameras, surveillance cameras in the area that we can pull video from to see exactly what happened, the lighting. So really every single aspect, from the infrastructure to the pedestrian behavior to the vehicle characteristics, all of that. And we look at it very, very carefully because we're only looking, in this case, at 15 cases.
What sort of conclusions and recommendations did you come up with?
Well, as all of you who are very familiar with pedestrian research know, we obviously looked at the infrastructure, and we also looked at the vehicle characteristics, the pedestrian behavior, and then the fourth area is more general. It has to do with the data collection because we simply don't have enough information about exposure data of pedestrians. So for infrastructure, for example, we looked at things like the road design, and as you know, there's many tools that we can use to improve road design, and it's also very geographically specialized. So even though each locale has its own special considerations, there are a lot of tools from AASHTO, from NACTO, from many other sources that communities can use to improve their infrastructure so that they can protect the pedestrians who live there in their communities. We also looked at the vehicle design, so it's really important to have things like collision avoidance. That will help prevent vehicles from hitting a pedestrian in the first place and avoid that. Braking, things like lower impact, so the vehicle, when it does hit a pedestrian, it's much less harmful to the pedestrian. Lighting, so that the vehicle has lighting that can illuminate the surroundings better, and so the pedestrian can be seen earlier. And then, of course, pedestrian behavior. We did find that there was impairment in both drivers and pedestrians in some cases. And then, of course, we saw all different types of pedestrians, from older, of all ages, in all types of settings. And it was everything from a child trying to get on a school bus to an older person taking a walk. So all of that, we looked at all the different behaviors and what are things that we can do in the environment in order to protect them as they are going about their daily tasks, so that they won't suffer deaths and injuries while they're trying to live life.
And vehicle design, so that, as you mentioned, collision avoidance systems, but also designing the vehicles so a pedestrian is more likely to survive a crash.
Yes.
What do we know about vehicles design and pedestrians?
So right now, in both for infrastructure and vehicle design, pedestrians are not always considered, and we need to change that. Vehicles can be changed. They can have design characteristics where it's much more forgiving when a pedestrian is hit. So, it's the impact, the energy is absorbed by the vehicle, and the pedestrian doesn't suffer as much, for example, head injuries. So there are many different characteristics of vehicle design, and those should actually be in things like the new car assessment program. A new car assessment program shouldn't just be about protecting the people inside the vehicle. We say it should be protecting the pedestrians and bicyclists and those who are vulnerable outside the vehicle as well.
Who do your recommendations in this report go to?
They go to two DOT agencies. That's the Federal Highway Administration and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, so FHWA and NHTSA. And we actually also, related to data, we also made a recommendation to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, because really, pedestrian safety is a health issue as well. It's injury prevention. So having the CDC and NHTSA work together and making sure that we have the best data to make the best decisions, that's also important. So we also made a recommendation to the CDC.
Last year, you had a report on speed. Mm-hmm. What was that about?
Well, it's related, John, because, speed affects all areas of highway safety. It's about, because speed, the physics of it, the more you speed, the more likely you're at risk of being in a crash. But on top of that, when you're in a crash at high speeds, you're more likely to be killed or injured. So really it affects all of that. And so we started looking at how we can use the already available knowledge about speed and make recommendations to states to do things such as not always popular but very safe automated speed enforcement. How we can recommend things like intelligent speed adaptation in vehicles so that the vehicle knows the speed limit and automatically slows down. How can we design communities so that there are slower speeds in the places with vulnerable road users? Sometimes, unfortunately, we design the speed only for the vehicles, but we should design it for all road users, and that includes pedestrians and bicyclists and others as well.
And you mentioned it had been quite a few years since the last time the board took a close look at pedestrians. What do you see for the future for what might be done in the way of looking at pedestrians maybe not 50 years from now?
Well, I think now, everyone's eyes are opened. We've always kept a close eye on pedestrians and really all, people in all types of transportation. But I'm happy that we finally had this one specific focus, a special investigation report. And, our newest investigations have been on automated vehicles. And that's also has an effect on pedestrians because we recently, unfortunately, had an investigation in Tempe, Arizona, where a pedestrian was actually wheeling her bicycle and she was struck by an automated vehicle that was unable to detect her as a pedestrian or a cyclist, and so was unable to stop in time, even though, ideally, of course, an automated vehicle would detect all types of road users. So I think we're going to be keeping a sharp eye on that, on automation in the future, but also, just encouraging and helping states and federal agencies use our recommendations so that we don't have this 15 or 16 deaths a day any longer.
We're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, talking with Doug Moore, who's president of Bike Baton Rouge. What is Bike Baton Rouge?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Bike Baton Rouge is a all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to make biking and walking safer and more enjoyable in the city of Baton Rouge.
How do you do that?
Well, we are part of our mission statement is advocacy, action, and education. So those are sort of the three pillars that we stand on when we, try to achieve our mission. Advocacy is done at a lot of times it's done at the government level. We have seats on a lot of committees, government committees, policy groups, things like that. And we, education. We do the research. We find best practices. We try and put those forward and get them out to our member base as well. Best ways to ride, best routes to ride, safest ways, and just action. Having fun, organizing rides, trying to get more people in saddles. The more people that ride, the funner it is for them, and the safer it is for everyone else.
And you mentioned having fun, going on rides and so on. Why is it important to do the fun stuff and not just have people sit in endless government meetings all the time?
Well, for one, the reason we have a seat at the table is because we have a membership base. It's not just me and 5 other people. It's over 100 people, and another few hundred kind of semi-engaged folks who follow us on social media and things like that. And they're not going to get involved if it's only about wonky policy and design guidelines stuff. That they can leave that to us. They trust us to do the research and come armed with the knowledge and be educated and things like that. And then in turn, they can show up for the fun things, the social rides, the themed rides, the parades, things like that. If they're trying to, maybe get to the grocery store, they can ask us the best way to get there, and we'll show them on a map that we made and vetted. And so sitting in meetings is not fun. Riding bikes is fun. We sit in meetings so everyone else doesn't have to. That's kind of the way we look at it.
What sort of improvements are you looking at trying to make over the next few years?
Well, any advocacy group involved in biking and walking, especially in places like the South, we need more infrastructure. We just, a lot of the roads that were built were just not built with anything in mind other than driving a car. So, you have main unavoidable arterial and collector roadways coming right through the middle of town that don't even have a sidewalk. And you'll have a well-worn foot trail next to it, a goat path, if you will, where clearly there's the demand, but the infrastructure just hadn't caught up to it yet. We have a real lack of bike lanes. We only about 1% of all of our streets have facilities for bikes. So we're trying to get more infrastructure, and we're trying to get the powers that be, the transportation officials, the government officials, and elected officials who always try and kind of plead poverty. Well, we can't afford that. Meanwhile, they're spending tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars on road projects that just make a roadway a little bit wider so some more cars can sit in traffic at once. And so we're trying to get them to realize that they have the money. They're just not spending it in the way that has the highest return on investment, in a way that builds wealth within a community instead of extracts it. Bike lanes and sidewalks are assets. There's no negative. There's almost no negative cost to them. Once they're built, they pay for themselves. Almost immediately. And so that's some of the things we're trying to do. Another is changing policies. A lot of some of the reasons they say, oh, we can't have a sidewalk or a crosswalk here, we can't have a bike lane here, is because of outdated transportation policies. Ones that were, maybe created without an urban environment in mind, a modern multimodal transportation environment in mind. And so we've been hard at work trying to get them to broaden their horizons a little bit when it comes to design standards and manuals, to show them that, you can accommodate all road users at this particular intersection. You just have to change the way you've been doing things, and you don't have to be the first ones to do it either. There's plenty of examples all over the country and in the world of similar situations where they've taken a road and made it safer. And not only had they made it safer, but they made the surrounding areas, more vibrant, more livable, more valuable. Not just for the people that own the property, but for the city or the state itself.
And how do you balance talking about the need for more sidewalks, more bike lanes, without scaring everybody away, thinking, oh, it's too dangerous to bike?
Well, that is a challenge to sort of walk both sides of that line. And here in Baton Rouge, and I'm sure it's like this in many other of our peer cities, you have areas of town that are really great for walking and biking. Usually the areas that were built before the dominance of the automobile, pre 1950s, pre interstate system, and then you'll have other pockets of neighborhoods that are great to walk in as well, and then you'll have really great off-road trail systems. The problem is that they don't connect, and until they connect, you don't really have a safe network in general. So to get from point A to point B, maybe 75% of that route is safe, but it's that 25% that can be sort of a deal breaker for a lot of people, and that's one of the things we're trying to do is address that 25% of the someone's typical route that they need, to get to work or get to the grocery store or get to a bus stop. But so one of the things we try and do is tell people to start small. We're big believers in incrementalism. Start with a mile from your house or a mile from your job, and see where you can get safely on foot or on bike just within that mile. Walking a mile is about 20 minutes. Biking that mile is about 5 or 6, and that's most trips that people take in their daily life is going to be within that mile or maybe even 2. So see where you can go within that mile, and then you might discover that I don't need to drive that. It's silly to drive that, and then the hope is they'll look beyond that mile and maybe go 2 or 3 or even 4, and it's not that far fetched. Hundreds of millions of people do it every day all over the world. Bike 3 miles to the store or to work or to a friend's house, and so we just want to tell people to give it a try. And if you're not sure where to go, they can let us know. We'll look at the map. We know the streets of the city inside and out, and we can tell you maybe there's a cut through over here you didn't think of, if you hadn't already gone through there, or a parking lot that you can utilize so you can avoid this couple of blocks of dangerous roadway, that sort of thing. And the hope is that people will do it enough to where they'll demand for their whole route to be safe. It's one thing for us to constantly, annoy the powers that be, the transportation officials. Lord knows they hear enough of it from us. We need, everyday people saying, I can't walk across the street. How was this allowed to have happened? To where I need to drive to a place that I could, hit by throwing a rock. And so that's kind of the message we're trying to say is, start small and then, be vocal about what's stopping you from going a little bit further.
Right next to the Mississippi River here, you got a levee along the river. What's on top of the levee?
Well, this is what I was talking about earlier. When we have, we do have an emerging system of really great off road multi-use paths, and we're actually right now we've got about 7 miles of it from the state capitol, going south, and then the hope is by this time next year that will be 13 and a half miles of continuous trail where you never have to deal with a single car. You can run a marathon and not have to block a street. You can get, you can do your century, you can do whatever you want on a bike, and it's been really, really cool to see it kind of come about. And it's been sort of in bits and pieces, as these things tend to be, but we're getting another huge piece pretty soon, and we're really excited about it.
Is there a long-term vision? You've got levees all the way up and down the Mississippi. Where would people like to eventually get with the levee trail?
Well, the sort of 20, 30-year dream is to connect Baton Rouge with New Orleans as much as possible, right along top of the levee systems that do exist. And then when there's not levees, where there's plants and ports and things, a safe way around those. The trick is, our parish, what other states would call a county, we've committed to going all the way to the parish line, and in the hopes that the next parish will kind of take up the torch and meet where New Orleans and Orleans Parish, what they've been able to do on top of their levee as well. To be able to have rides from Baton Rouge to New Orleans and back would be just really amazing for the bike tourism industry in southern Louisiana. It'd be just a really cool thing to be able to do.
And other than a longer levee trail, if I were to come back to Baton Rouge in a decade, what would you like to be able to show me?
Well, biggest thing, I'd like just to be able to show you that more people are taking active transportation. They got fed up of sitting in their cars, spending all the money that one has to when you spend an hour and a half in your car every day, and just have more people walking and biking just because they can. Hopefully, in terms of physical infrastructure, a completed pathway system along our drainage canals. We've got a few miles of that already, and we're getting pieces of it every year. And a long-term plan is to have that all connected, and to have miles and miles of pristine, 12-foot wide poured concrete path with benches and lighting in the southeast part of the city. And elsewhere in the city, the state is paying for us to have a pedestrian and bicycle master plan created right now. We're on the committee helping to oversee that project, and we've offered a lot of input. We even took the consultants on a couple of bike rides to show them what it's like, from the on the ground, from the user's point of view. I'd love to see the city and the state commit to funding the proposals that are going to be in that plan. It's not out of the realm of possibility for us to have a nationally recognized bike and pedestrian network, where people can get where they need to go and feel safe and comfortable doing it. A lot of people think that's unrealistic, and I personally don't. I'm not doing this to waste my time or anyone else's time. I'm not a glutton for punishment. I'm doing it because I think it's entirely possible and achievable, and it's just going to take a little political will to fund it and be willing to look at certain streets and say, you know what, we were wrong. This was not how this should have been built, and it's never too late to correct a mistake like that. My greatest fear is that they'll double down on bad design as they have in the past, and which always ends up costing more money than we would ever ask for. That's kind of one of the ironies of this sort of thing is, good ideas tend to be inexpensive, so nobody wants to build them. But the bad ideas cost a lot and make a lot of people a lot of money. So those are the projects that get pushed forth by the engineers and the contracting firms and things like that. My hope is that in 20 years, that mindset has shifted to a more progressive, more fiscally responsible, frankly, reality, to where people realize that a mile of bike lane has much more value than 10 miles of widened freeway coming right through the heart of the city.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.